Welcome everyone. Today we are engaging in Module 3, Meaningful Integration of Indigenous Education in the FSL Classroom. This module is the combined work of myself, Sarah DeWard, as well as Saray Jepson and Tiffany Alexandra Massiana Kelly, under the guidance and consultation of Elder Eileen Beaver. This session builds on the work of Modules 1 and 2 and brings us to a place of practice where we will learn how to engage with Indigenous content mindfully, respectfully, and courageously. We acknowledge our own learning journeys and understand that integrating Indigenous content can feel overwhelming. But remember, this is not about perfection. It's about intention. As we begin, we honor the land itself and the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded it since time immemorial. Take time to learn and say the names of the nations who have cared for the land where you are located today. In much of Ontario, you'll find yourself on Anishinaabe land. In the east, it could be Haudenosaunee land, while today's Western Ontario is Mischief. Along the northern shores, you may sit on Cree land. These are each unique peoples and cultures who had and have a relationship with the particular geography, plants, and animals of that area. The large place called Ontario is intimately known by several nations. Now imagine the incredible, seemingly microscopic depth of knowledge of the land that exists across the boundaries of Canada, and then Turtle Island. We honor the intimate relationship with each hill and valley, the gentle, quiet relationship with the lakes and the life they provide. If you can, look outside right now. Notice that particular tree today, whether its leaves are hidden inside springtime buds or wait patiently through the winter cold. I invite you to keep noticing that small piece of land. Is it the same tomorrow or the week and month after? This deep, steady rhythm of the land connects us to each other and to those who have inhabited and those who will inhabit this land. I'd like to preface with a disclaimer. This module will address sensitive topics, truths that may be uncomfortable. We ask that you come with curiosity and compassion. Indigenous cultures are diverse, and everyone here is at a different point in their journey. Discomfort is part of this process. Lean into it. Support one another. Some information will feel familiar, and some will stretch your thinking. Let both be welcome. Approach this learning with the same openness that, as teachers, we hope for from our students. Here's our pathway today. We will start with teaching truth. Then we will explore dismantling colonial systems of oppression. Next, we'll address creating culturally inclusive schools, followed by everyday teaching strategies, and then I will pass it over to you. Through this module, the aim is to move from reflection into action, always anchored in the symbiotic relationship between these teachings and the needs of our students and society as a whole. Saray Jepson and Tiffany Alexandra Massiana Kelly delivered the lectures for Modules 1 and 2. Saray Jepson approached these lessons with her passion for community-driven responses to local needs through identifying, planning, and responding to issues. She's highly educated, holding her master's with a focus on integrating Indigenous knowledge into existing systems of education and governance. Tiffany Alexandra Massiana Kelly draws deep inspiration from her dual heritage, which is not only reflected in her culturally grounded children's books, but also played a major role in her contributions to these modules. The importance of precision, care, and tradition guides her art and teaching. I have the distinct honor of diving into this module with you. I'm Sarah DeWard, and I am an entrepreneur, educator, author, and screenwriter of Métis descent. I always knew I was Métis from both my mother and my father's side. However, it was not something that anyone taught me about. So I'm in the process of exploring my family's heritage. I have 2 traditionally published young adult books called White Lies and Defy that I'm really proud of. I have been an elementary educator for the District School Board of Niagara for 20 years, so I am a great fit to talk to you about the practical side of these teachings so that you can apply them. I know what it's like to be in your shoes. Elder Eileen Beaver has been on this journey with us throughout the making and delivery of these 3 modules. She is thankful for our continuance of learning and research. Most of all, she hopes that we continue to be open-minded and reflect on Indigenous strength and success. Indigenous artists, authors, directors, physicians, lawyers, judges, business owners, and so on can ignite Indigenous students to see themselves and to possibly pursue their own excellence in the future. Indigenous folks were often excluded from conversations about education because the intention was to assimilate and terminate their existence. In too many ways, systems continue to assimilate. When learning these concepts of Indigenous worldviews, you're being asked to incorporate and decolonize institutional instructional structures and replace them with Indigenous perspective whenever possible. Reconciliation starts with educators being receptive and willing to help us find ways to reconcile and live in peace. Agreements were governed by the wampum belt and mutual understanding. This is a good start in how to address reconciliation and to include it in your classroom. Sovereign nations are humble and forgiving people. Elder Eileen Beaver asks that we find meaningful ways to reconcile by inclusive approaches to rectify past and present wrongs done to Indigenous peoples. As we have and will discuss, the Truth and Reconciliation Report is a great place to begin. She commends our commitment to reconciling and working towards how to include Indigenous perspectives within FSL in Ontario classrooms. Guided by the wisdom of Elder Eileen Beaver, Saray Jepson, Tiffany Alexander Massiana, Kelly, and myself have woven together our unique experiences and perspectives, ensuring that each element of this module is grounded in both personal insight and collective responsibility. This approach not only enriches the content, but also models the kind of inclusive, reflective practice that we hope to inspire in you. Indigenous education is about strength, excellence, and relationship. Let that guide us today. And remember that some of these ideas will not feel explicitly Indigenous, and that's actually a good thing. Avoid feelings of forced integration or appropriation. For example, when introducing a method or framework to your class, you needn't state it as an Indigenous practice. Make note of the adaptable ideas to implement in your own FSL context. Move to creating classrooms that are more inclusive, engaging, culturally affirming, and ultimately more effective for all students. Throughout this module, we will pause and reflect in order to deepen our connection to the learning. Please take a moment now to think about the following and consider writing down some thoughts for you to compare later. What are your greatest strengths as an educator? What are your growth areas? What do you think Indigenous joy in education looks like? Let's dive into our agenda, starting with the concept of teaching truth. Reconciliation needs ongoing public education, youth engagement, and dialogue. These 5 important principles help us teach through an Indigenous lens. Relationality, which celebrates learning through relationships. Interconnectedness. This addresses how everything is connected, including language, land, people. The importance of story. Stories are sacred teachings, not entertainment. Two-eyed seeing. The principle of honoring both Indigenous and Western knowledges. Trauma-informed. Emotional safety is imperative for justice. Let these shape not just what you teach, but how you teach. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, TRC, was created in 2008 through a legal settlement between residential schools survivors, the Assembly of First Nations Inuit representatives, and the parties responsible for creation and operation of the schools, the federal government, and the church bodies. The TRC documented the truth of survivors, their families, communities, and anyone personally affected by the residential school experience. By 2015, the TRC concluded its mandate and published 94 calls to action. Truth and Reconciliation focuses on transforming education systems, ensuring all students in Canada learn the full history and present realities of Indigenous peoples. Specifically, Call to Action number 62 calls upon all governments, in consultation and collaboration with survivors, Indigenous peoples, and educators, to 1. Make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools and historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, mandatory education requirements for K to 12 students. 2. Provide the necessary funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods into classrooms. 3. Provide the necessary funding to schools to utilize Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods. 4. Establish senior level positions in government at the Assistant Deputy Minister level or higher dedicated to this content in education. Call to Action number 63 has the Council of Ministers of Education in Canada mandated to maintain an annual commitment to education issues, including developing and implementing K-12 curriculum and learning resources on the peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, sharing information and best practices on teaching curriculum related to these topics, building student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect, identifying teacher training needs relating to the above. The TRC educates us teachers to perform work with care while building intercultural understanding and empathy. Some things for you to think about now, throughout this module, and definitely afterwards. Ask yourself, what can I do in my FSL class or role to honor these calls to action? With that, we will be moving on to our next topic of the module, dismantling colonial systems of oppression. This is a topic of some contention in some circles, but it should not be. To reframe our thinking, structures that embody freedom and humanness will have to be built, and that comes at the cost of dismantling the existing structures. Although it's changing, schooling still rigidly maintains harmful systems of oppression and Indigenous disappearance, and unfortunately, for many intents and purposes, it has become a serious impediment to personal fulfillment and liberation. Under the present conditions, schools can do little to improve society in general. However, there is hope. They can become relevant if they are involved in the forces of decolonization. Some people are on board with this, and you may be one of them. Sadly, not enough educators and higher ups subscribe to these beliefs and practices. Incorporating Indigenous knowledge and perspectives is increasingly being recognized as vital for environmental stewardship because of its insights into resource management and understanding, reconciliation because it is a crucial step towards building mutually respectful relationships, education because it deepens the understanding of Canada's history and environment. Through research and innovation, Indigenous knowledge offers unique perspectives and solutions to various contemporary challenges. Decision-making processes lead to more inclusive and equitable outcomes. Colonial systems weren't built overnight, and we won't dismantle them overnight either. But schools can stop being sites of harm if we engage in decolonizing practices. The process is vital and ongoing. We are each critical pieces of the puzzle, and the recognition of Indigenous knowledge is crucial for a better future for all. Just like we ask our students to embrace learning with a growth mindset, the same is required for the personal and professional learning within these modules. More so, through the application of the learning of these modules. Overhauling teaching techniques and resources takes us out of our comfort zones, but this is not a bad thing. Change is usually precipitated by discomfort. Please take a moment to reflect and write down your responses to these questions. What does it look like for the everyday teachers who want to recognize Indigenous knowledge and strive to dismantle colonial systems of oppression? What assumptions or practices in your own teaching might need to be disrupted for that kind of alignment? How will you stay present and accountable if that work feels uncomfortable? The goal is to build connections on all kinds of levels. This approach to pedagogy is meant to be a better experience for the teachers and for all of the students. Students should know that the shared and explicit goal is to learn and feel their best. Find and tell the stories of Indigenous and French interactions in your area. For example, in reading comprehension and research projects that build cultural and language skills. Hold space for your comfort and relationship with the knowledge itself by reading, talking, and engaging with others. Remember, if it feels awkward for you, it will be awkward for them. You don't need to know everything, but you should feel connection and meaning in the concepts that you bring to your students. Reciprocity is also key. Integrating Indigenous methods or knowledge should involve a sense of mutual benefit, not a transference from Indigenous to colonial spaces. Here are more ideas to reflect on regarding your intentions and actions. How am I ensuring that the Indigenous knowledge, stories, or art forms I share are properly credited? How am I fostering admiration and appreciation between my students and Indigenous culture? When collaborating with community experts, am I offering fair compensation that acknowledges the value of their time, knowledge, and emotional labor? Can I find ways to do this through protocol and honoraria, but also logistical support? Can I work in a way that gives back to Indigenous students and Indigenous communities? How about in ways that build positive perceptions of Indigenous knowledge? Now that we have identified ways to teach the truth and approaches to dismantling colonial systems of oppression, let's shine a light on the ever important notion of culturally inclusive schools. There are ways, some big, some small, some passive, and some more involved, which your school or district can honor and acknowledge treaty land and its people that work, live, and call home. Do you read or say land acknowledgements at assemblies? How about during morning announcements? Do you extend it professionally during meetings? Do you seek and use resources written by Indigenous authors? Do you ever invite an elder or knowledge keeper to begin important ceremonies and events? Do you invite elders and or knowledge keepers into the school during the day-to-day of the school year? It's important to keep in mind that becoming an anti-racist educator does not and cannot happen in isolation. As school leaders, we must hold our colleagues and wider community accountable to this work. These are often the harder things to do because younger students today are more accustomed to these teachings and efforts. Looking deeply at this, how does your school support cultural inclusivity truly? A couple of steps you can take to extend your classroom practice into the hallways, playground, and shared spaces that honor Indigenous presence and history are by displaying historical acknowledgments like the 2008 Statement of Apology to Residential School Survivors and the treaty land on which the school is located. Also, you can include truth and reconciliation materials like the TRC report, history books addressing the Indian Act, assimilation, and residential schools, as well as strong, strengths based literature highlighting Indigenous excellence. You can foster continuous self reflection and growth by teaching Indigenous content and perspectives with treaty education in the curriculum, if applicable. You can connect with local Indigenous community members to integrate examples into lessons. The 4Rs framework exemplifies Indigenous culture: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility in education. Be mindful of avoiding harmful generalizations. This may sound intimidating, but simple ways to keep this front of mind are by avoiding pan-Indigenous approaches by being specific and local. Please avoid essentializing any Indigenous student by asking them to speak for all Indigenous peoples. Schools can maintain cultural competency and humility by providing teacher resources on local Indigenous histories, cultures, and traditions, and by supporting teachers in their learning goal and understanding of how history impacts current contexts. It's also quite freeing to practice cultural humility by recognizing your role as a guest on Indigenous land. As far as language and cultural integration goes, celebrate relationships by prioritizing relationships over curriculum. This means building trust through relational teaching approaches. How about something as simple and breathtaking as including culturally relevant literature and art through displays within your communities and schools? If you have some reservations about incorporating the wrong resources into your lesson and units, here are some questions to guide you. Does the creator or source of this knowledge come from inside or outside the Indigenous culture it represents? Do I understand why the resource exists? Why am I choosing it for my students? Who benefits from me using this in my classroom? Does the resource simply make me feel like I've fulfilled a requirement, or does it make me feel excited to share it? Are there any legal limits on who can share it or how this knowledge can be presented? Are there any ways that this resource inadvertently reinforces stereotypes or misrepresents the culture? A lot of these questions are deep and complicated, but what's most important is a shift to caring about them and your mindfulness as an educator. That's where the magic happens. Ultimately, it all boils down to authenticity and respect. It means centering values, worldviews, and resilience, and not just visible symbols. Meaning, connection, and strength are what truly guide the learning. The pathway to this involves focusing on integrating Indigenous pedagogical approaches and core values more often than what a lot of well meaning educators did in the recent past with explicitly Indigenous artifacts and texts. To accomplish this redirection, shift the focus from the thing, like a dream catcher, to the thing's meaning and purpose, which enhances storytelling, community building, and connection to nature. Emphasize holistic learning. Recognize multiple ways of understanding. These pedagogical principles often resonate with good teaching practices across cultures, and if you don't incorporate them already, you'll feel pleasantly surprised by how natural and easy they become. There is a lot of darkness and trauma involved in things that happened to Indigenous cultures in history. Therefore, teaching about trauma must be balanced with stories of Indigenous resilience, brilliance, and ongoing contribution so that students understand not only what was endured, but also what has endured. For example, Inuit have a history of being relocated, renamed, indoctrinated, dehumanized, and more, but Inuit simultaneously have been instrumental with Canadian Rangers, Northern Canadian Security and Patrol, and have some of the strongest Indigenous language retention rates across Canada. Inuit are also writers, producers, and actors that contribute to the entertainment fabric of the country. Educators have more pressure put on them regarding assessment and evaluation now more than ever because of data driven analytics and reporting. Traditional assessment methods often prioritize identifying errors and deducting points, which highlights the deficits of the students. Different learning styles or oral strengths of students are overshadowed by a relentless emphasis on written tests and culminating assignments. A lot of traditional academic exercises do not fully capture holistic understanding or language ability. In short, help decolonize assessment by shifting towards practices that are strengths based. They highlight growth over time and are more equitable for diverse learners. If you don't already, we encourage you to adopt assessment practices that are strengths based. Document and celebrate what your students can do, and frame assessment as an opportunity to show how far they've come. Consider grading that reflects the student's demonstrated ability at the end of the semester or grading period, rather than penalizing them for initial struggles. Some fun ideas are try gamification strategies like leveling up to put the focus on gains and not mistakes. Consider breaking assessment scores into specific components or skills. A student might have excellent reading comprehension, but poor spelling. A lot of you are probably thinking this is nothing new, but too many teachers clump all kinds of required skills into one rubric, and they span all kinds of curriculum expectations, making it truly difficult to celebrate strengths. Is 78% a truly accurate description of their ability across the board? Provide your students with multiple ways to show their learning. Does this require more planning? Yes. Does it require a solid framework for keeping track of assessment? Yes. But once you adopt this way of approaching it, it starts to become easier, and behavior management needs decrease because the kids feel seen and successful with a greater capacity for a healthy growth mindset. These are the steps educators need to take bravely in order to dismantle colonization in the field. There is a movement towards lower stakes assessments that can more accurately show what students know. For example, students can record themselves speaking at home, students can bring in an outline for an essay and write the essay in class. Teachers can accept and promote multiple attempts at assessments without penalty. Portfolio assessments guide students to collect evidence of their FSL learning over time, which provides a personalized picture of their growth. A cool concept to consider is two-eyed evaluation, which seeks ways to pair qualitative and holistic assessment with the quantitative requirements of the educational system. This could bridge the gap for a lot of educators who are apprehensive about what it means to decolonize the system. Examples of two-eyed evaluation includes things like looking beyond just measurable language skills like grammar accuracy to consider holistic indicators of progress like the willingness to take risks with the language through improved conversation skills. Whenever possible, involve students in the assessment process. In summary, hopefully a lot of these practices are things you're doing already. You just hadn't really thought of how in line they are with Indigenous culture. If a lot of these ideas were foreign to you, then perhaps you will warm up to them and give them a try. Integrating Indigenous pedagogical approaches creates engaging, relevant, and holistic learning environments that benefit you and, most importantly, all of your learners. Focus on core values like flexibility, interconnectedness, and relationality. The land, story, community interaction, and new perspectives provide tools for language acquisition and cultural understanding. Strengths based assessments are the way to go. What we encourage the most is for you to find joy in the work. This is not, nor ever was, just about fulfilling a mandate. Thoughtful, open hearted incorporation will genuinely bring more joy, connection, engagement, and relevance into your FSL teaching. The real step toward an anti racist future requires focusing on the strength, wisdom, and humor within Indigenous perspectives that will dramatically change students' narratives about Indigenous culture and people. Settler educators' nervousness about addressing the TRC's calls to action often arises from valid concerns. There is a need to be aware of cultural appropriation and potentially harmful reinforcement of negative stereotypes and unconscious bias in your classroom. However, hesitation shouldn't lead to inaction. In these moments, these pauses for reflection, unlearning occurs. These are some responsible cultural engagement do's. Support students in engaging with diverse cultures in ways that highlight both shared humanity and respectful recognition of difference to build connection, empathy, and mutual respect. Ensure alignment with curriculum expectations while honoring the intent of the TRC and the calls to action by asking if each approach is grounded in reconciliation and truth. Invite Indigenous knowledge through relationships with trusted Indigenous voices by consulting permission through your curriculum lead. These are some responsible cultural engagement don'ts. Don't teach or speculate about Indigenous religious beliefs, sacred ceremonies, or protected cultural practices because they are often private, sacred, and not appropriate for classroom instruction. Don't oversimplify or generalize Indigenous cultures by portraying all Indigenous peoples as a single group. As we learned from the earlier modules, there is vast diversity, and much of what is considered culture is complex, sacred, and not yours to teach. Before we continue, take a moment to sit with any discomfort, fears, or maybe even excitement that's coming up for you. What do you think these feelings are trying to teach you? What do you need to learn next? Are you centering your own comfort or the need for justice and truth in your classroom and curriculum? When you feel uncertain, where can you turn for guidance, support, or relationship rather than retreat? How will you ensure that your efforts to teach about Indigenous peoples center Indigenous voices, knowledge, and priorities rather than your own interpretations? While cultural appropriation is a valid concern, Indigenous peoples are often more open to respectful engagement than educators might assume. It is admirable, courageous, and forward thinking when learning is approached with genuine curiosity, care, humility, and relationship building. As we have mentioned a few times, land acknowledgements are a way to insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights into everyday life. They can be an explicit yet limited way to recognize the history of colonialism and First Nations, as well as a need for change in settler colonial societies. Some people may mention the name of a local treaty, some may learn the language and speak a few words in it. Here are a few things to consider when crafting and declaring land acknowledgements. Include intention, care, and personal responsibility. Go beyond a scripted reading. Research and practice phonetic pronunciations. Make clear connections between the acknowledgement and the purpose of your gathering or event. Reflect on the ongoing impacts of colonialism where you are. Consider how and why you are in this space and what actionable commitments you are willing to make to disrupt colonial structures. Take a moment to consider when you last wrote, gave, or heard a land acknowledgement. Did it answer or address any of the following points? Who you are, in the context of the space you occupy, what it compels you to do, why the contextual changes to the land acknowledgement are important and necessary, how the land acknowledgement relates to what is happening. If it didn't address those, or only some, what changes might you now make as a result? Now that you've opened your minds and hearts for the other two modules and the things we've addressed here today, it's time to take it from theory into wonderful practice with some practical ideas for everyday teaching. These suggestions actually incorporate Indigenous teachings in the language classroom. Please make note of things that spark interest for you and start collecting an idea list or to reference when you're lesson planning. When your goal is holistic learning, use Indigenous pedagogy that brings out the interconnected aspects of a person, including intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual. A possible application for this is when talking about daily routines and activities, plan around well-being. For example, students could sort their vocabulary according to which of those 4 areas it supports. Reflection is key. Does it feel balanced? Why or why not? Talk about how others maintain their emotional and spiritual health. When your goal is relationality, learning that happens through relationships with peers, teachers, community, and the content itself, and knowing that negative feelings will also impact students' ability to learn. A possible application for this is class discussions structured using a talking circle format. Use a talking piece to ensure only one person speaks at a time. Students can listen actively by recording what they hear from others through words or doodles. The topic can be anything: reflections on a text, practicing grammar points in context, discussing cultural topics in French, building community and oral skills, etc. When your goal is teaching about the land itself is a teacher through direct experience and observation. Connect learning to time and place. Possible applications for this are to take students outside. Hold the snow while describing it. Use rocks and sticks to demonstrate prepositions. Move around the school building if you're teaching school-based vocabulary. Physical connections help students internalize the new vocabulary. When your goal is storytelling, oral tradition carries knowledge, history, and brings joy. Listening and speaking are typically harder for students. Oral tradition builds moments of intentional practice. Possible applications for this are to talk about the reasons that Indigenous people told stories. Have students make oral stories that help them remember important ideas like history, culture, grammar, stories that teach us something about how to behave in the world, stories that make the listener laugh. The possibilities are endless. More applications consisting of the importance of storytelling can include welcoming storytellers by inviting a knowledge keeper to share a story with the class in English, explanations of how oral tradition passed stories across territories and languages as you create French retellings of the story, and determining the most important elements to keep the message intact. Experiential learning is also a great way to celebrate Indigenous culture in learning. Knowledge acquisition is undoubtedly connected to hands-on and personal experience. For example, use task-based language. Have them read a recipe to create something to eat. Have them demonstrate their understanding of how to get from one small town to another using public transit. Have them respond to an ad for an apartment for rent with relevant questions. Games and humor make learning more memorable and help with that little thing called joy we're aiming for. Possible applications for this are as simple as introducing cooperative Indigenous games that prioritize participation over competition. Plenty of widely shared Indigenous games focus on physical activity, cooperation, and skill development. Consult resources like Aboriginal Sports Circle NWT or Indigenous Sport and Wellness Ontario. Indigenous approaches diversify the learning for varied ages, abilities, and languages. These are powerful ways to reimagine inclusion and connection in the FSL classroom that you can be very proud of. Regarding ages and stages, learning happens beautifully in ad hoc groups of mixed ages, levels, and degrees of understanding. Each student receives what they can, while teaching involves pure observation without expectation or performance pressures. Put practically, after learning a new grammar concept or something, activities can be structured where students who feel confident can choose to do it in a way that is visible to other students. Those who are building confidence can follow along, and those who are just beginning might choose to watch the second group, and so on. A linguistic connection to this is how French and Michif have some surprisingly similar features, which helps reduce the feeling of Indigenous culture as other. Another application for this can be using reliable Michif resources. You can present a short list of simple Michif nouns to match with their French equivalents, or discuss how French grammatical gender might appear in Michif examples. This takes us to a point where, after teaching truth, thinking about how to dismantle colonial systems of oppression, cultivating culturally inclusive schools, and presenting practical ideas for everyday teaching, the final part of this module is handing it over to you. Now it is truly up to you, and there is strength in numbers as so many boards and educators are stepping up to honor the TRC calls to action in education specifically. Through these modules and possibly through self-driven endeavors, you did the research, learned about the history, learned how to unlearn events from a colonial perspective, and are mindful of the colonial systems that we continue to live and work in. So what's next? Now it is time to act. You have made lists, gathered contact information, purchased and possibly made resources, completed these modules, and now you can implement what you learned. This is a marathon, not a race. However, the bang has sounded and it's begun. Start slow, build your comfort and confidence, and understand that it will take time to implement all the wonderful ideas that you have. These are some resources on this vital journey you're embarking on that are recommended highly. Potlatch's Pedagogy, Learning Through Ceremony by Sarah Florence Davidson and Robert Davidson. Based on the foundational ceremony of the Haida people, Potlatch's Pedagogy presents a model for learning that is holistic, relational, practical, and continuous. Medicine Wheel Teachings by Frank Seprenant is an easy-to-follow guide explaining what a medicine wheel is and how it is relevant to our lives today. Frank's vision for this book is that it will be an invaluable tool to understand the connectedness with all things: human, animal, mineral, plant, insect, and more. Restoring Education, Decolonizing Your Practice Using a Critical Lens by Carolyn Roberts. Roberts offers questions for self-reflection, suggestions for professional action, recommended resources for further learning, personal stories and anecdotes, insights from her own decolonizing teaching practices, and playlists that reflect the spirit of the work and that uplift Indigenous voices. Teacher Take Care, a guide to well-being and workplace wellness for educators by various authors and edited by Jennifer E. Lawson. Through stories by diverse educators, this professional resource invites you to try different wellness strategies, explore varying perspectives, and consider new ideas of what it means to be well. Teaching Where You Are, Weaving Indigenous and Slow Principles and Pedagogies by Shannon Letty and Laurie Miller is a guide for non-Indigenous educators to work in good ways with Indigenous students and provides resources across curricular areas to support all students. Two seasoned educators, one Indigenous and one settler, bring to bear their years of experience teaching in elementary, secondary, and post-secondary contexts to explore the ways in which Indigenous and SLO approaches to teaching and learning mirror and complement one another. Land is Relation, Teaching and Learning Through Place, People, and Practices, edited by Margaret Kress and Canty Horn Miller, is a critically and timely collection that introduces readers to an intersectional approach to Indigenous space and land-based education. Indigenous and ally partnered contributors from elders to emerging and established scholars share teachings and scholarship grounded in Indigenous knowledge and philosophy. Finally, Waiwa, Indigenous Pedagogies, An Act for Reconciliation in Anti-Racist Education by Joe Crona, is a powerful and engaging resource for non-Indigenous educators who want to learn more, are new to these conversations, or want to deepen their learning. We give loads of credit to these resources and appendices for giving us the foundational knowledge necessary to create this module. Thank you for your support and feedback. Please take a moment to complete the survey that's found at https://bit.ly/478SI or please scan this QR code. If you have any questions about this module, please send an email to omlta@omlta.org. These modules were created under the leadership of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association. The OMLTA is a nonprofit professional association that has been supporting French as a second language and international languages teachers of all programs and grade levels since 1886. These modules were designed to support FSL teachers in becoming anti-racist FSL educators through the development of the foundations presented in this series so they may feel more comfortable, confident, and equipped to be equitable and inclusive in their second language learning classrooms in a manner that is sincere and authentic. On behalf of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association, I would like to thank the Ministry of Education for its financial support in developing this module series as part of the overarching series, How to be an Anti-Racist Educator in FSL. Special thanks to these educators who contributed their expertise and experience to the development of these modules, along with me, Sarah DeBoard, Andrea Vogan, Saray Jepson, Tiffany Alexander Massiana Kelly, Elder Eileen Beaver, Jason Moore, Jean Wan, Malin Evans Sinclair. I appreciate your time, dedication to the students, and to a better society, one intentional and self-aware step at a time. I wish you all the best and thank you for what you do.